Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now this is a book that I have been dying to read over the last couple of months. I've really been getting into Stephen King this year. I've read 3 of his books now, including The Green Mile, and I have to say overall my experience has been very, very positive. He is definitely becoming an author that I increasingly want to read. And that's just really exciting because he has so many books, so many different works across different genres that I just cannot wait to get my hands on. Now, The Green Mile is one that I was particularly excited about given the kind of thematic work that it's covering, but also because there is this kind of fantastical, supernatural element to it. I haven't read any of King's fantasy or supernatural yet, so this was my first one. Overall, I did enjoy The Green Mile. I think it was a really solid book. Was it my favourite? No, but that's okay. Not every single book has to be a favourite. But I was actually hoping that this one would be a favourite because of what I'd heard about the book, and also the plot just sounded fascinating. So I was expecting it to be better than what I experienced. But that being said, it wasn't a bad book by any means. I still really enjoyed it overall. So let's jump into my review. I'm not going to do a synopsis. If you want to do a synopsis, go ahead and find one online. There's always the risk that you end up spoiling it for someone by accident. And I don't actually generally read plots or plot summaries anymore before I go into a book. I just knew about this book because of the movie and because of some of the thematic work that is covered. So I will give you the choice to look up a summary if you so wish to, if you haven't read it. So let's jump into what I liked about it. King's writing continues to be very impressive. He knows how to write. You know, he gets the job done with minimal fluff and it flows really well. There's no wasting words. There's no meandering here and there. There's no overly descriptive sections or paragraphs. It just gets the job done. It tells the story in the way that it needs to be told, and that's it. We're left to our devices to read it, enjoy it, consume it in the way that we wish to. And I really like that. I don't think writing has to be overly fluffy. I don't think it has to be overly poetic. I think it just needs to get the message across. And I think there are different mechanisms in which an author can do that. And I think King has found a very simple way for him to do that in the best way possible. And I really like that. I really respect him for that. And I really hope that all of his books are like that. And I have to say, in the ones that I have read so far, it has been like that too. So that's very promising. The next thing I really liked was the pacing. Now, this is very much a slow start. I would say the first couple of chapters are really about building the context, about building the world in the prison that we are in. And it's really about just building the tension up quite a bit. We are getting introductions to a lot of different characters in the first couple of chapters. And by building up those characters, we really get a sense of what this place is like and what it does to people as well. And I think that in itself is really fascinating and a really great way to look at characters in the context of this prison and how it impacts each person differently. A lot of people might not like that though. I think slow starts are very much a personal preference thing. I really liked it. I think the work needed to be done at the start so that when the book really picks up, we're already engrossed, we're already invested, we're already creeped out and ready to go. So I love that. As an extension of that, I did really like the world building. I did briefly mention that, but I do really think the prison itself is a character. We really get a sense of how oppressive and claustrophobic this place feels, whether it's for our main character or whether it's for the prisoners, whether it's for the rat. Like, we really get a sense of what this prison is like. I could probably draw what the prison looks like from the way that King describes it in the book. It's a very foreboding place. Naturally, prisons are going to be, but it's especially foreboding given the context surrounding the prison and the prisoners that are there. I won't go into it too much in case I spoil anything, but it's just this constant sense of dread. You know, whenever we're near the prison or in the prison, which is the majority of the book, there is this constant sense of unease that something is not right. And I think that is represented in the prison itself very, very well. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the characters. I think the characters were really good. Like I said, I think the first couple of chapters were really about focusing on those characters, really building those characters out so that when the book really picks up, we're already invested in them. Our narrator was probably my favourite character, or one of my favourite characters, Paul Edgecombe. He is the person who is writing the story retrospectively. I love books told in that way. And so we are getting his kind of reflections and his notes as he's writing the story of what happened when John Coffey entered into that prison. He's a very relatable character, I think. You know, I think he's very fair and he's trying to make the best out of a bad situation. He tries to give these prisoners dignity, which is really interesting, because there is a question of whether these prisoners in particular, given the nature of that crimes, whether they actually deserve that dignity. But he's always willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, whilst never forgetting what they've done and why they're there in the first place. And I think that's a really compelling character to follow, because he's balanced. And even though, you know, there is the question of whether he's a reliable narrator, he is a very balanced narrator. And so we are much more likely to side with him and see through his perspective, because he's not an extreme. You know, he's not very horrible towards the prisoners, but he's also not completely ambivalent towards the prisoners. He's kind of somewhere in the middle, and I think that's where probably most people would be if they were in his situation. The next character I'm going to talk about is John Coffey. John Coffey is essentially the kind of focal point of this book. He essentially enters into the prison and weird stuff starts happening when he enters into that prison. He's a very intriguing character, and I have to say there was something about his character that I really liked, and it was the fact that he was this very quiet, very grounded individual. When you compare him to some of the other prisoners, his character screams like solitude and isolation. And I think when you have that in mind in the context of what this story is about, you could very quickly begin to realise that John Coffey isn't who people claim him to be. And that's even before our narrator realises that. And I thought that was really interesting. And I really like that, because we are able to have empathy for him when he's going through something really horrible, but there is still this question mark about whether he did it or not. That wasn't very eloquent, but I hope I'm clear in what I'm saying. Essentially, we are presented with facts that he has done something, but I think very, very early on, we realise that he didn't do that thing. And it's interesting to see how other characters react to him when they do think he did that thing. Again, not very eloquent, but you probably get where I'm going with that. But I really like John Coffey. My favourite moments were actually with John Coffey and Paul Edgecombe. Those were my favourite scenes when they were interacting with each other. I actually wish we had a lot more of them two together, and I'll come on to that a little bit more later. The last character that I'm going to mention, because this is, you know, there's a really wide cast, and I think every single character is really well fleshed out, and I think every single character really adds to the book. But the last one I am going to mention is Percy Wetmore. Absolutely hated this guy. Stephen King really has a wonderful skill in making me hate certain characters. I absolutely detested Percy Wetmore. You know, he's an Epo baby. All he does is complain and whine. All he does is want to look good. And like, it's never really about what's right and about trying to make it easier for his colleagues and the people who are working with him. He's just a horrible person. He's an evil, evil guy, which is interesting because a lot of the prisoners are also evil, but yet you kind of put him in the same bucket as them, even though he hasn't necessarily committed a crime. Like, I just detested him, and I honestly would have been happy if, you know, I'm not going to say it, but you can probably get where I was going with that sentence. But I really liked the kind of opposing character traits and the personalities and how they all worked together and how they didn't work together. I think it was really, really well done. Now I'm going to talk about the not so good. Now, I wouldn't say I hated any of these things in particular. I just think that they were either like missed opportunities or I was just maybe expecting a bit more. I think the first thing is that I was expecting this to be a lot more creepier, but it just wasn't. Like, a lot of people describe this as like a psychological horror thriller. And like, I just didn't get that vibe. I think maybe the movie is more creepy, but the book itself, I didn't feel creeped out. You know, like when I read Misery or when I read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, I had goosebumps multiple times when I was reading those books. I didn't get that once in this book, and I just expected to be a bit more weirded out. Now, there are a lot of horrific things happening in this book, and there's a lot of very vivid descriptions of those things happening, and that definitely horrified me. But I wouldn't say I was creeped out. You know, when I read a King book, I expect to be a little bit creeped out, and I just didn't get that at all. So that was, you know, it didn't gel with the kind of vibe that I was hoping to get, but it is what it is. And then, I mentioned this briefly earlier, my favourite parts of this book were with Coffey and Edgecombe. Coffey is barely in this book. You know, he's barely in it, you know, considering that the book really kicks off when he comes into it and it really centers around him. We don't get that much time with him, and I just wanted more, like significantly more. As an extension of that, I really would have liked more time between Edgecombe and Coffee. We had a few conversations between them, but I feel like that should have been a huge part of this book, and it just wasn't. And I don't know why, like I don't know why King made that choice, but I feel like we could have dialed up the parts with Coffee and Edgecombe in them together, and I think it would have made it a lot better. I think that would have made it like a 4.5 or a 5-star read for me, because those were the best bits, 100%. Their conversations, even when they're not speaking to each other and they're just looking at each other, those moments were the best and the most telling. And like, we only got a handful of them. Like, it's a almost 400-page book. We should have got a lot more than that, in my opinion. The last thing I'm going to talk about is that I think the thematic work was really interesting. I think there was a lot of really interesting exploration about race and how there are double standards when it comes to black men in particular and white men. And I just felt like it was very, very, very surface level. And I would have liked a lot more exploration about that particular theme. And we just did not get it. And I think that led to me not feeling as hyped about the book as maybe I could have been, because not that I'm saying every book needs to be like super meaningful and super philosophical, but I think that particular theme, especially set in America, where race is such a misnomer, you know, people can't talk about race in America in a rational way anymore. Like it's really polarizing as a topic, and it almost always becomes instantly political. And I just think having that context, and especially at the time that this book was written in, like, I just think it would have been so much more interesting if we'd had a bit more exploration about that, and we just didn't get as much commentary as I would have expected, given that one of our main characters, John Coffey, is black, and we know that about him. It's made very abundantly clear to us that he is black, and yet it doesn't get explored. Like, we get told it multiple times, and it comes up multiple times, and yet that's about it. Like, it doesn't really dig deeper than that. And I just thought that was such a missed opportunity. I have heard very mixed things about Stephen King and his treatment of race, particularly of black people. I think in particular black men, and how, you know, he's very liberal in his use of certain derogatory terms. I haven't come across that yet. I don't think that came up in this book. And what I'm referring to is specifically the usage of specific terms that are very, very derogatory and very discriminatory as well. I've heard that does exist in his other books, but I just think it was silly, like, not to talk about it more, given that he mentions it multiple times. So anyway, I'm going to stop there on that specific bit. But I just thought it was a missed opportunity. I just think he should have spent a bit more time, because, you know, if you've read any article or watched any documentary about prisons in America, you know that there is a disproportionately larger amount of black men in US prisons. It's also the same in UK prisons, but in US prisons than there are white men. Like, it's disproportionately high. It's just missed opportunity. Okay, I'm going to stop that. So I gave this book a kind of 3.75, borderline 4 stars. I do think it's more of a 3.75. I just wanted more, you know, I wanted more. I wanted more about race. I wanted more John Coffey. I wanted more creepiness. I just wanted more, you know. It is what it is. And I did enjoy it overall, but I just think it was missing some things that could have easily have made this a 5 stars for me. So I'm really curious to hear what some of you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below, because I know a lot of you have read this book and like Stephen King. So please post your thoughts down below and let's take the conversation there. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.